This week on the Four Rivers Ag Report, I liked Isaac better when he was the bartender on the Love Boat and growing up on a dairy farm. And we will see historically what happens when a hurricane does come to visit. All that and much more on the Four Rivers Ag Report. Welcome to the Four Rivers Ag Report. I'm Fred Peralta. What a year! Wet spring, very dry summer, burnt up corn, and now there are people running around with their hair on fire saying Isaac will be this or that. We've been waiting for a drought buster. We just don't want it all at once. So keep an eye on the window and be especially careful. And why not just stay at home and enjoy the programming on WEIU? Now, look to your left and look to your right. What do you see? Probably not a farmer. I've seen countless guys running combines in the cornfields and lots of trucks running back and forth late into the night. If they're not in the field right now, then they're catching up on their sleep, and that's good for them. If you know a farmer, please remind them to be extremely careful. This is the time of year when farm accidents can happen, especially when the farmers are working long hours. It's been a tough enough year already. We don't need a bad accident to cap it off. But this time of year also reminds us about how hard a farm life can be. I recently talked to Bob Switzer about a book he wrote about growing up on a dairy farm in northern Illinois. The book is called A Family Farm. Bob, tell me about where you grew up.
I grew up on a farm in northwestern Illinois. It was a mixed dairy and hog farm in Stevenson County, very close to the Wisconsin state line.
So how big was this farm? Was it a major operation?
No, it was only 121 acres, which, you know, for the farms of the time my grandparents started farming was about all a family could handle. But
what was about the first year you could remember the farm?
We moved there right after World War II when my dad came back from the Navy. So we moved there in the summer of 1946. And I was put to work. There was a lot to be done. My grandparents had farmed only with horses, and so Dad couldn't get modern machinery right away because of the war production. And we went to work, learned to handle horses, and of course at age 6, we didn't do too much heavy work, but
it seemed heavy at the time.
It did, and my brother was older, so he got the heavier load first. By the time we were, say, 12, we were both doing the same sorts of things.
So, growing up on a farm had to be a real experience for you. What sort of things do you remember about being young in the farm after that post-war period? That was a huge period of change, too.
Yeah, certainly. Because of the age I was before, my memories of the time before that, when Dad was in the Navy, are a bit fragmentary. But everything from the farm is very intense. It's a mixed set of recollections, some of them really quite pleasant. As I grew older, I really liked certain kinds of field work because it's very visible what you have done and what you've accomplished, and there's something satisfying about that. The summers are really hot, the winters are really cold, the buildings were very old and completely uninsulated and poorly heated, the barn not at all, of course. And so I remember a lot of cold feet. I remember having to get up awfully early to help with chores, milking cows and sloughing hogs.
So dairy work was different back in the 40s and 50s than it was a little bit later on. Did you have to do it by hand, or was it machinery based?
My grandparents had milked their cows by hand until the farm was electrified, and I don't know exactly when that was, but it could have been actually during World War II or slightly before through the rural electrification program.
Right.
So by the time we moved there, they did have an electrically powered milking machine, and we learned to use it, of course. The milk was still carried in buckets to be filtered and then stored in milk cans in a big tank, the same tank the cattle drank their water from to keep it cool.
Okay.
And we took it to the cheese factory every day because we couldn't really store it to keep it cold any longer.
How many head of cattle were there?
The barn had stalls for 20, as I recall. Before long, we would milk more cows than that and shift the first batch out and bring another batch in. But I don't think Dad ever milks more than about 40 or 50 head.
Okay. So you grew up on the farm in the, if you moved there in 46 and you were 6 years old, you became a teenager in the mid to late 50s.
That's correct. I graduated from high school in 1957.
Okay, so that was a very interesting time. The Cold War was going on, this whole push towards modernization and building up the sciences. How did you get an interest in science?
I had a lot of influences. One of them, as we've talked about, was simply from growing up in the natural world with both domestic and wild life all around me. But another major influence was my mother, who had studied biology in college, actually had a degree in biology. And although she was now serving simply as a farm wife, she'd kept her books and her specimens and her microscope slides and greatly encouraged that interest. And then in high school, it was consolidated by a couple of really fine teachers.
Excellent. So you were interested in the natural world all around you, and
Really?
the farm was a great place to grow up doing that. When you went away to college, what was summers like when you came back?
Well, they were intense because I was a student here at the University of Illinois, which was a wonderful opportunity for me because it was very inexpensive to come here at that time, and the science programs were spectacular.
Right.
But I needed money, and so in the summers, the first 2 summers, I went back home to work for my father,
All right.
and then he would contribute toward my college education
Right.
in exchange for a summer's labor, and there was plenty of it.
He got the better end of that deal.
Well, I think, yeah, he got me at a pretty good price.
Yeah.
I had free room and board, but there was a lot of field work, of course, and I think in my book I talk about how he always saved the nasty chore of having to castrate pigs until I got home. And
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, thanks. And they were too big, really. They should have been done much earlier.
Yeah. So it was a cattle and hog farm, and those are 2 very different temperamental types of animals.
They are.
You know, what were some of the differences you saw in them?
Well, you know, there are 2 kind of myths about hogs. One is that they're dirty, and the other is that they're not very bright, and both are wrong, actually. Hogs
Somebody described them as evil to me, but go ahead.
they're very intelligent animals. They actually make pretty good pets, although we only did that in one case.
Right.
They also are reasonably clean. I mean, they will find water to wallow in because they have trouble handling heat, and that's their only way of getting rid of excess heat is to get wet. Cattle, on the other hand, are not very clean animals, and they're not very bright. I must admit I never got very fond of them. They had too much to do with them.
So, how did farming change over your time on the farm and afterwards when you came out? Obviously, you went to study at U of I and became a doctor of biochemistry. So you went around the world, you studied, you saw, but you kept one eye on home, right?
Of course, yeah. I kept visiting until the farm, after Dad died and the farm was sold in 1991. And farming changed radically during that period of time. The mechanization and consolidation of smaller farms into larger farms was happening all around. But Dad had both of his sons had gone away from the farm and weren't partnering with him, so it wasn't practical for him to enlarge too much. He didn't have a son-in-law either to work with him. And he was also a child of the Depression and had been just seen how debt tormented his parents and my mother's parents, so he was reluctant to borrow money. And you really can't expand without borrowing a lot of money.
Yes, and you're right, that generation to go out on a limb and borrow thousands of dollars to buy a few acres would just been horrible.
But those farmers who did prospered, and they built new buildings and bought much larger equipment, and they adopted modern methods of agriculture, and they basically absorbed a lot of the other smaller, less efficient farms. Dad was a good farmer in the sense he understood scientific agriculture, and he greatly increased the productivity of the land that he did operate by using modern techniques and fertilizers and artificial insemination for the cattle. He was proud of his ability to be a steward to the land.
What is your favorite memory of being on the farm?
There's so many, it's really hard to pull out. Some of my favorite memories actually have to do when I was no longer there, but I took my children back.
Okay.
They loved it, and they still tell stories about visiting their grandparents' farm. To them, it was an adventure, a huge outdoor playground, right? The livestock were fascinating, and Grandpa wasn't trying to make them go to work at 5:30 in the morning, so they had a nice time. We even left them there to stay with Dad when he was a widower, while my wife and I took a few days holiday by ourselves. They have great stories to tell about that. So it's odd. It has not to do so much with farming itself, but the way my children enjoyed it and had a much happier perspective than I did because I was so keen to leave when I finished high school.
Well, your book, A Family Farm, is a nice, warm memory of your family farm. I'm sure others can remember their experiences well through you. So
A lot do, and I've tried to make it a truthful and unsentimental telling of the story. There's unhappy parts there too, and it's the story of one family. What I find out as I talk to people is that there are thousands and thousands of family farm stories that people care deeply about. It's really a lot of fun to awaken that in the people who talk to me about my book.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
This week on the news, Monica tells us a tale about some not-so-sour grapes. Monica?
Thanks, Fred. I'm Monica Becker. When it comes to Isaac, the Midwest is putting out our welcome mat. The path of the storm is expected to bring it up our direction, and with it, a well-needed rain, potentially up to 6 inches. But as much as we need to make up the moisture deficit with harvest already underway, farmers may wish Isaac would have come later in the year, at least until the corn is in. And how are the corn and beans looking? The USDA reports that corn statewide is 91% dented, 44% mature, and 6% harvested. In our district, we are at 91% dented, 50% mature, and 8% is harvested. Soybeans statewide are reported at 97% setting pods and 20% turning yellow. The East-Southeast district is reported at 95% setting pods and 32% turning yellow. Topsoil is 77% very short, 18% short, and 5% adequate. Subsoil is only marginally better at 91% very short and 9% short. So if you mix a bit of Isaac with weakened corn, the chances of infections increase. We reported last week that the Illinois Department of Agriculture is beginning to do spot checks at grain elevators, testing for 3 different mycotoxins, including aflatoxin. By next week, the IDOA should be distributing guidelines for grain elevators, warehouses, processors, and feed mills for the handling of aflatoxin-contaminated corn. Very few problems with aflatoxin have been reported so far. But if we do have a problem with contaminated corn, just add that to the list of problems that livestock producers have had to live through this year. 2012 has been unkind to pork producers. Purdue Extension economist Chris Hurt cited several reasons for falling prices and higher production costs: more hogs than expected, rapid sow liquidation, and record feed prices. Hurt warns that there is strong evidence that the initial wave of breeding herd reduction began in early August and has intensified. He added financial losses of the magnitudes projected will cause massive erosion of family equity and some bankruptcies. If hog producers can hang on until mid-summer 2013, Hurt believes that hog prices will recover. And if there are any pork producers left, the USDA will be conducting the quarterly Hogs and Pigs survey. Producers will be contacted by either mail, phone, or in person. Brad Schwab, the director of the NASS Illinois field office, strongly requests that producers participate, noting that the quarterly surveys enable the NASS to provide timely, accurate, and useful data that all sectors of the U.S. pork industry depend on to help make sound business decisions. The price of feed is causing many farmers to get very creative. One possible solution for cattle farmers? Open the gate. Travis Meter of the U of I Ag Extension Office says that allowing cattle to graze on harvested cornfields may be the most economical solution and very healthy for the cows. Cattle graze selectively, eating the more palatable, most nutritious parts first, and then eat the less desirous portions of the corn stalk later. So nitrate poisoning is not a serious concern. Studies show that cows grazing on corn stalks for 60 days will remove approximately 30 to 40% of the crop residue. And 2 to 3 acres would be needed to feed a single cow for that 60 days. Another creative option, widening the hay loads on the interstates. With the drought, farmers are finding that they have to travel farther and move loads of hay longer distances to feed their herds. On local and state roads, hay loads could be up to 12 feet wide. Problem, loads that wide are not permitted on interstate highways. Starting December 31st, 2012, Illinois will join neighboring states in permitting loads up to 12 feet if the farmer has applied for a state waiver. If you're interested, check out the Illinois Department of Transportation's website. Now it seems that we keep reporting some of the unusual results of the drought, and at least there is a market for beef and pork. But horse meat? Animal rescue operations report a flood of abandoned horses thanks to bad economy and now sky-high feed prices. Many people who held on to their horses during the economic downturn are now letting them go, often without telling anyone about it. Horse rescue groups are finding more horses in their stalls than they had the night before. So in this case, many people are putting their grocery cart before their horse. But for all the downsides of this summer's drought, there may be some good news, or at least something to toast. Vineyards around the Midwest are reporting some of the best grape crops in years. The drought, it seems, has limited grape size, but concentrated sugar contents. That sugar will ferment nicely for some standout wines. Harvest sizes will be down, but the grapes that survive will be perfect for sweet wines. One problem is that drought-stressed vines are less likely to survive a harsh winter, but if the wine is as good as they say it will be, who will notice? That's it for this week. I'm Monica Becker. Thanks for watching.
One of the biggest parts of the USDA's budget is subsidizing school meals. Producers will be glad to hear that this year, those meals will be healthier and fresher.
Food served to students across the nation should be healthier this school year. U.S. Department of Agriculture officials say the new Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act requires that the entire school environment supports a healthy diet.
So what's in the vending machines, what is sold in the cafeteria, all of that will reflect the guidelines and will create for children, when they walk in the door in the morning to the time that they leave in the afternoon, a healthy food environment.
The school meals that are served each day to 32 million American children at noontime are going to feature every school day of the week fruits and vegetables every day. That's a change and an improvement. Healthier dairy, lower fat dairy, more water guaranteed to every school child, more whole grains in terms of the breads that are served.
Rowe says USDA wants parents to have confidence that school cafeterias can provide students with a nutritious diet.
It could make a very significant impact on participation in the cafeteria. We want children to eat in the cafeteria. We now want parents who are packing school lunches to look at the cafeteria as a really healthy alternative.
Concannon says locally grown food will be a major focus of USDA's effort to make more fresh food available to students.
And we've been encouraging more schools to procure their foods locally, or at least a portion that they serve to the 32 million American children who participate in our national school lunch program.
For the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I'm Bob Ellison.
We don't know just how much rain Isaac will be delivering to this area, but we do know what other hurricanes and tropical storms have brought in the past. This week, Braden Harp looks back for us in Under the Four Rivers Sky.
At this time of the year, much of the United States focuses on hurricane activity in the eastern half of the country. People here in the Midwest occasionally ask, do hurricanes influence our region? The answer is simple. Yes, only if the path of the hurricane shifts far enough to the west before moving north. First, let's learn how a hurricane is created. Warm sea surface temperatures are necessary in order for a hurricane to develop in the mid-Atlantic. Starting off as a tropical depression, a low pressure is created using the warm rising air from the ocean. As the low pressure begins to spin, it develops further into a tropical storm with an increase in wind speed and a decrease in pressure. As the system develops, it is pushed by the northeast trade winds across the Atlantic Ocean. If the conditions are favorable, the next stage of development would be a hurricane. There are several tracks that hurricanes take. Some stay east of the United States. Others take a path into the Gulf of Mexico. It is these hurricanes that have the potential to influence the local rainfall patterns. Once the hurricane makes landfall, the coastal area in the path of the storm will experience torrential rainfall and extremely powerful winds. The surrounding area affected by the hurricane will experience strong storm surge, a flooding event caused by the rise in sea level due to the hurricane itself. After landfall, the hurricane will start to fall apart. This is due to a variety of reasons. First, the topography, or the surface land structure, will cause the storm to experience resistance coming from the friction at the surface. Second, the hurricane loses energy that the warm ocean waters provided it. In the past, tropical storms and hurricanes have influenced the weather in the Midwest region. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 had a track that brought the storm south of Florida into the Gulf and made landfall east of New Orleans, Louisiana as a Category 3 hurricane. Contrary to popular belief, hurricane tracks do not stop at the Gulf Coast, but continue on their path over the land. The torrential rain from the storm will dissipate slowly as the hurricane breaks up over the continental United States. Due to this process, Katrina dropped 2.5 inches of rainfall here in Charleston. In September 2008, hurricanes Gustav and Ike made landfall on the Gulf Coast and tracked through Midwest United States. Both storms combined provided Charleston, Illinois with 2 inches of rainfall. Although hurricanes that make landfall in the Gulf can be very destructive to Gulf states, systems like these can also affect local rainfall patterns.
Hurricane Isaac made landfall as a hurricane. It will continue to be a hurricane Category 1 through most of Louisiana. Then it will start to break apart and then begin to turn into a tropical storm. From there, it continues to move north towards Illinois, and then it will become a depression. Now, if everything holds together, we could see between 2.5 to 4.5 inches of rain come Saturday, Sunday, and possibly even Monday. With the current drought situation, even if we get 4 inches of rain for Charleston, what we still need is about 8 inches of rain to get us back to normal. So this is not going to turn off the drought situation. It's going to improve it, but we're still going to see drought persist through November.
With the current drought situation in the United States causing multitudes of problems for agriculture, business, and the environment, This hurricane season storms may be a previously unknown saving grace and an end to the drought of 2012. The only thing that can be hoped for is that the hurricanes this season track through the Gulf of Mexico without doing significant harm to the residents along the coast, instead providing the four rivers with ample precipitation.
I normally close the program with a cute story about some agricultural product or some animal doing something out of the ordinary. This week, I could have reported on earthworms who are soaking up heavy metals from landfills, or cows who are being fed discarded chocolate because of the high cost of feed. But instead, I'd like to take a moment to remind you to use the best tool God gave us, our heads. Be safe. Don't work so hard or so late that you end up making stupid mistakes that could frankly kill you. And don't drive into water that you don't know how deep it is, and don't let damage to material things cause you to go out in bad weather and jeopardize you and your family's safety. We want you to hang around. Frankly, I need all the viewers I have. So work hard, be safe, and enjoy the beautiful sunsets when they come back. I'm Fred Peralta, and thanks for watching the Four Rivers Ag Report.